Greetings friends, my name is Pavel Steinmach and now we will dive into the top news of this day. The Russian Ministry of Defense, more than a day after first news about what is happening in the Belgorod region, issued an official statement on the situation. Due to Kremlin officers, enemy formations were blocked and defeated by airstrikes, artillery fire and the active actions of the cover units of the state border. Sabotage reconnaissance groups were thrown back into the territory of Ukraine, more than 70 military men were killed, 4 armored combat vehicles and 5 pickup trucks were destroyed, stated in Russian Ministry of Defense. On May 22nd, in the Graivoronsky district of Belgorod region, volunteer fighters from the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion opened a front in a struggle against the Putin regime in Russia. The events in Belgorod region are internal Russian processes. Some Russians are fighting against Putin's dictatorship and the Kremlin criminal war. The successes of a small Russian detachment in Belgorod region demonstrated the vulnerability of Russia as a state. Most of those forces were thrown into the war in Ukraine. Russian propaganda could not ignore such an incident on Russian territory, which exacerbated panic among Russians.
The only driving political force in a totalitarian country of tiny screws is always an armed guerrilla movement. Ukraine is watching the events in the Belgorod region of Russia with interest and studying the situation, but it has nothing to do with it. As you know, tanks are sold at any Russian military store, and underground guerrilla groups are composed of Russian citizens. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the Office of President of Ukraine, on Twitter.
Started a war against Ukraine, Putin will no longer be able to guarantee the security of any of his territories. War always comes back to where it came from. The continuation of the aggressive war by the Putin regime will lead to even greater resistance within Russia and the outbreak of possibly a civil war on its territory. Events in Belgorod Oblast bring up the issue of creating a demilitarized security strip in the border regions of Russia with Ukraine. And as postscriptum, today Russian media wrote that another military groups came into the Bagunhorodok and Shchetinovka. What is happening in Russian territory? And does anyone know why it all started? The NATO Parliamentary Assembly unanimously recognized the regime in the Russian Federation as ruscism. The concept of ruscism introduced by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on May 2nd has begun to be used at the international level. There is a growing awareness in the world of Russian aggression against Ukraine as a genocidal war. The creation of the Special International Tribunal in the case of the crime of aggression of Russia against Ukraine is moving forward. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly pledged Monday to maintain unwavering support for Ukraine and appealed to leaders of the alliance to speed up deliveries of fighter aircraft and other military hardware Kyiv needs in struggle against Russian aggression. Russia's war seeks to crush Ukraine's democracy and by extension undermine the values that are fundamental to NATO and the entire democratic, civilized and peaceful world, said a declaration adopted by the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which brings together parliamentarians from all 31 allied nations. In response, a NATO summit scheduled for 11th and 12th of July in Vilnius must increase and speed up political, military, intelligence, financial, training and humanitarian support, and to sustain this support for as long as it takes for Ukraine to prevail and restore in full its territorial integrity. Summit must reconfirm that the country's rightful place is in NATO and that Ukraine will be a member of the alliance.
We will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Today, through its courageous resistance to Russian aggression, Ukraine is defending our common security, our values and the rules-based international order. It is the future of this international order that is at stake. Joël Guyot-Milem, President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
In addition, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly expressed determination that the Russian regime and its co-aggressors and the Belarusian regime be held accountable for the crime of aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity and possible acts of genocide committed in Ukraine. The declaration also denounced Iran's support for Russia's war and stated that any provision of lethal aid by China to Russia would be a historic mistake, which would have profound implications. Addressing the meeting by video link from Ukraine, Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov listed air defense systems and armored vehicles as his country's priority equipment needs. As the Russian Federation does not have hypersonic weapons, Kinzhals are aeroballistics, but not hypersonics. They can be shot down by modern Western air defense systems. It was hit twice in May. So it is necessary to supply Ukraine with as many air defense systems as possible. For example, for tests in real time and for further improvement. High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Josep Borrell called on the foreign ministers of the European Union member states to speed up the supply of ammunition and weapons, as well as work on improving a new tranche of military assistance for Ukraine. Borrell emphasized that the success of Ukraine on the battlefield depends not only on the courage of the soldiers and the Ukrainian people, but also on the supply of ammunition and weapons, in connection with which support from the EU should not only continue, but also be increased, in particular through the supply of air defense systems, which will demonstrate a real difference on the battlefield.
It's vital for Ukrainians to be able to defend their territory and sovereignty. I stressed that every day our deliveries and delayed is measured in human lives. It's not about money, but about being killed or injured. I urged all ministers to expedite deliveries, participate in joint purchase of ammunition for Ukraine, and complete work on the next tranche of the European Peace Fund. Josep Borrell, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
Borrell also said the ministers discussed the situation on the battlefield and how to end this war. Everyone wants to finish it. The only one who wants to continue is Putin. Nobody wants peace more than Ukraine. Therefore, the EU supports President Zelensky's Ukrainian initiative for a just peace. In addition, according to the head of European diplomacy, during the meeting, the ministers discussed the 11th package of sanctions, which is aimed at stopping the ability to circumvent existing ones. Borrell also said that the support mission had already trained 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers so far, and another 15,000 would be trained by the end of the year. Early high-ranking diplomat of the Swedish EU presidency said that the ministers of foreign affairs of the member states of the European Union discussed the upcoming summit dedicated to the promotion of the peace formula of President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky on the international arena. This summit is scheduled for mid-July and will be held in Copenhagen, reacting to the remark of journalists that a NATO summit is also scheduled for mid-July, which will be held on July 11th and 12th in Vilnius. The diplomats specified that there is intention to hold the Zelensky Peace Formula Summit before the summit of the North Atlantic Alliance. So we are waiting for fateful decisions, as for us, as for Russia. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Subscribe to UATV English and goodbye.